You were unaware that you have a test tomorrow. Now you are aware. Um, but yeah, so there's a test tomorrow. Okay, that test will cover like the three linkage institutions, so political media, political parties, and then interest groups. And in all honesty, it's probably going to go in that order of importance. Okay, so I'm going to go through interest groups today. I'm actually going to speed through this relatively quickly because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't actually care about interest groups quite as much. Okay. Some of you will join an interest group at some point in time in your life. I've actually had students in the past that are already members of an interest group, right? Because you might be part of like, some sort of FFA, like farmers group. I've had students that are like junior members of the NRA, as an example. Okay, but interest groups, sadly, I actually hate doing this. I cannot define an interest group without like breaking my own rules in which I use the words to define the words, right? So an interest group is simply a group of people with a common interest. If you struggle to understand that, like at that point, I can't really help you. Okay, so hopefully you understand that. Hopefully you also then understand that political parties, because I kind of hinted at this with you yesterday, right? Political parties are actually kind of interest groups, right? Because if we're going to use that definition for an interest group, a group of people with a common interest, what are political parties? They're a group of people with common interests. That would be plural, and that's really where the differentiation begins, right? Political parties have multiple interests. Interest groups have one singular interest, and that is it, right? Mothers Against Drunk Driving, guess what they care about? Stopping drunk driving. That's it. They don't care about abortion. They don't care about balancing the budget. They don't care about national defense. They don't care about guns. They don't care about anything other than drunk driving. Okay? That is their singular interest. Now, what happens then is you could actually end up joining a wide variety of groups. Okay? The function of interest groups is basically to organize people to advocate for whatever it is that they're looking to do. Right? So interest groups are looking to influence government. This is separation number 2 between political parties and interest groups. Political parties' primary purpose is what? A political party's primary purpose is what? What's that, Rodney? To get elected. To win elections. That is their primary purpose. Their primary purpose is to win elections. Okay? What is an interest group's primary purpose? It is not to win elections. They do not run candidates. Okay? Instead, an interest group's primary purpose is to influence legislation or law or the implementation of law. They are looking to influence very specific aspects of what's going on within our government. Okay? And they do this predominantly through a term called lobbying. That is a term I will not define for you on your test tomorrow. Okay? Lobbying is just the act of asking government for something. Okay? Now, what you'll learn throughout the course of this lecture is interest groups are really only made up of wealthy people, right? Or middle class, upper middle class wealthy people, because those are the people that have disposable income that can give to interest groups, right? That means that interest groups then disproportionately represent the interests of the elites or the wealthy within American society. And that's probably not a great thing, but the reality is we cannot stop interest groups from forming because interest groups have constitutional rights to exist. And you have a constitutional right to like free speech, right? Freedom of assembly, which is what an interest group is. Assembling is just coming together, right? And then your another First Amendment protection there is freedom of petition, which is literally asking the government to do something for you, which is what interest groups are going to do. And there are a wide variety of types of interest groups. I don't care that much. I'm not going to test you on types of interest groups. Okay? I'm not going to test you on like what's the difference between a public sector or a private sector interest group, or a labor interest group versus a professional interest group. Okay? There are a whole bunch of different types. Okay? But what I want you to actually understand, right, is not, well, let's get into public interest groups, right? Because I do want you to understand that there's a difference between sort of professional working interest groups, right? Like the United Auto Workers, which has an interest group. Well, a lot of unions have interest groups. The teachers union has an interest group. They are advocating for things specifically within their interest. Public interest groups are rather interest groups that people can just join based upon their own beliefs or ideologies or opinions. And again, I don't care about that. I do want you to have some concept or understanding of the massive amounts of money that are spent in lobbying the government. Okay? And by the way, just so you're aware, when I say lobbying the government, I mean all government, all levels. Right? Interest groups, we tend to talk about interest groups as an organization that lobbies Congress or lobbies the national government. That is absolutely true. They are going to lobby nationally for whatever policies or procedures they're trying to get implemented out of Washington, D.C. But I promise you, you have all sorts of interest groups that also lobby at the state level, right? For instance, you have interest groups right now that are lobbying the state of Texas to pass a constitutional amendment that will allow for vouchers in public schools, right? That way we decrease public school funding even more, right? Because people can now opt out of the taxes that go to public schools. All right, why are interest groups common? Here's the thing. One, this actually goes back to the very founding of the nation, right? There were people that looked at Americans, and I don't think that this is American-centric anymore, but there were people that believed it was American-centric 250 years ago, right? That somehow 250 years ago, Americans had a larger propensity, right? Meaning that it was more common for Americans to want to join groups. I don't think that's true anymore, but I do think that that is a part of human nature, right? We are a social species, yes, right? We do not do well in isolation, all right? So I think it's within our nature to actually join groups. I think it's within our nature to seek out people who are similar to us, who think similar to us, who are aligned intellectually to those things that we want or need or care about, okay? So interest groups then becomes common. One, because we want to join interest groups and we want to be around like-minded people. Two, the more that the United States government does, right, the more society advances, the more complex things get, the more people have an opinion about the things that are going on. 200 plus years ago, the United States federal government did like 12 things. That was it, right? They had 12 jobs. The cabinet, which you'll learn about near the end of this semester, the cabinet consisted of 4 dudes. The cabinet now consists of like 26, okay? Our government was much smaller. It had a much smaller scope in terms of what it was doing on a day-to-day basis. As the scope increases, as the complexity increases, as the country gets richer, right? All of these things are factors that lead people to join groups. Okay? Now, here's where the interest groups gets tricky. Okay? Because obviously interest groups are a group of people that have come together to advocate for some sort of policy. Yes? Right? How many of us in here would like to see, like, the air be clean? All of us, yes? Nobody wants to breathe. Like, have y'all actually ever seen pictures of like New York City or LA in the 1980s? They're like, all photos of LA and New York are hazy in the 1980s. It looks like a grainy, sort of yellow-brown, like, texture onto the picture. Okay? That is not a result of poor picture quality. That is just what the air looked like back then. Okay? You used to be able to see the air in major cities. How old is that picture? Is that 1980s? Yeah, there you go. Okay? Like, so just to put this in perspective for you, do we know anything about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? Y'all learned about that in U.S. history class? They're the Steelers. Why are they the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I don't know.
Because that's where Andrew Carnegie set up shop, and that's where like the Bessemer steel process was. Like, that is the hub of U.S. steel in the 1900s, 20th century, right? So we had massive factories pumping out steel like that, right? What do factories do? They pollute. Okay? Pittsburgh used to be so bad that the street lamps in Pittsburgh were on 24 hours a day. Because it was just always dark in Pittsburgh. Always. Right? So, we understand that getting like clean air is an important concept, yes? We want to decrease pollution. All of us would have put up our hand there. Yes, we don't like pollution. None of us want to breathe like bad air. None of us want to have asthma that's a result of like poor air quality. Right? Okay? How many of you are willing to go and do the work for it? Like, how many of you are going to actively give your time to go support organizations, right, that are advocating for clean air acts and clean water acts and like anti-pollution measures? Nobody? So all of us wanted the clean air, none of us are willing to work for it? Right? What happens when one of us works for it and is successful? That would make you want to do it as well? How many of you have ever been in a group project where somebody did all the work and you didn't have to do anything? Did you want to work with that person again? Yes! Because you got a good grade for doing nothing. This is a thing that actually happens with interest groups, right? There are people in the United States that benefit off of interest groups who have no relation to the interest group. They are not actively helping the interest group obtain its goals. Instead, if we have an interest group, and again, by the way, if you go back and you compare those pictures of New York City from 1980 to those pictures of New York City today, what do you find? The air is significantly cleaner. Okay? We have made massive progress as far as environmental cleanup goes in the United States. In the 1960s, 70s, right, there was a river that caught fire more than once. Do you understand that? A river caught fire. Okay? Is that river flammable today? No. Right? We have cleaned that up. Okay? I think it's called the Cuyahoga. It was called the Cuyahoga River. Right? It's up in Ohio. Okay? We have cleaned that up. It's not flammable anymore. Okay? Did you do any of that work? No, you did not. I didn't either. My dad didn't. But guess what? We all benefit from it. Okay? At that point, we are free riders. Okay? We are getting some sort of collective good that's a good for everybody, i.e. clean water, clean air, whatever, without doing anything to help. So you need to understand this concept of collective goods. You need to understand the concept of free riders. Right? Now, in order for interest groups to get people to join, interest groups have to give you something, right? Hopefully all of you realize, all of you are aware, you don't do anything for free. Yes? Right? We're not just going to do something just to do it, right? We want something in return. Okay? So, the things that interest groups can give you. One, we break these into 4 different types of benefits. Informational benefits. They can provide you with knowledge. Some people actually care about that in this world. Right? 2, they can provide you with material benefits. Lots of people care about that. Okay? They can provide you with solitary benefits. Right? That would be things like friendship, interacting with other people. Right? Like if you are really, really old and you find yourself a widow or a widower, right? You might decide to go join the AARP in order to get out of the house and actually go, like, interact with people. Yes? Yeah. Okay? And then purposive benefits. And purposive benefits is basically the concept of getting something sort of spiritual out of it, right? A purposive benefit is the idea of you feeling better. You have helped a cause, right? That can be significant to people. All right. This gets us to pluralism, which I know I hinted at least a little bit yesterday as we were talking about political parties and the two-party system. Pluralism is really important as it pertains to interest group, because here's the deal, right? But by the way, just so you understand, there are thousands of interest groups today. Thousands. Okay? If you had the United States population split amongst thousands of groups, right, and then you needed some sort of majority, some sort of consolidated majority in order to dictate behavior, in order to pass legislation, right, that would require these groups to coordinate efforts, right? It would require these groups to compromise with one another in order to get things accomplished. This is the idea behind pluralism. It is a wonderful, wonderful idea. Okay? I believe in pluralism with like the very fiber of my being. Okay? I love the idea of pluralism because I love the idea of more ideas and more competition amongst ideas, because the more ideas that exist in the world, the better off we all are. Okay? I cannot express enough to you how terrible groupthink is. Okay? If you don't know what groupthink is, I don't know how you got to your senior year of high school without reading 1984. Okay? It's now a manual for how to govern. It should not be. Alright? And so that's the idea behind pluralism. It is not necessarily that great, though, because obviously poor people are not represented. People without disposable income are not overly represented. Guys, one of these days I'm going to stop recording my lectures and actually force you to pay attention in class, rather than like the 10 people out of, there's only what, 27 of you in here today? More than a third of us are on our phones. Like at this point, I'm wondering if a third of you even know what class you're sitting in. Okay? Interest groups, a lot of interest groups will form as a result. First of all, interest groups form as a result of voluntary association. You cannot be forced into an interest group. And we have freedom of sort of thought in that regard. And in order to create an interest group, though, you need both highly invested people that are willing to advocate and push for the outcomes that you're seeking, but then you also need resources, right? Essentially money, time, enough people, right? That matters. Once you have those things and you can actually create an interest group, At that point, you're going to begin to try to utilize the power that you have. Again, probably haven't done a good enough job of explaining this to you yet, right? But you operate in a democracy, right? In a democracy, where does the power lie? With you, individually. All of you in this room are uniquely powerful, okay? I cannot stress that enough. All of you have power. Right? Now the reality is there's 330 million people in the United States. That means power is divided theoretically equally amongst the 330 people. Now we know due to like socioeconomics that's not actually true. It's not divided equally, right? But you're competing in order to utilize power or wield power with 330 million other people, right? So how do you do that? How do you actually wield the little bit of power that you have? You consolidate it. You join with others who think along the same lines as you, right? And you pool your resources, you pool the power you have in order to try to get whatever it is accomplished that you want to get accomplished. So once you have created your group, right, now you're pooling that power, okay? You're going to try to go and use the power. You can do that a couple of different ways, right? The insider way is the idea of going directly through the government, right? Going to and through the government. Right, so to the government is the concept of lobbying. That's where you call up Ted Cruz and you're like, hey, Raphael, I want you to do this for me. Right? Don't call that man Raphael. He probably won't respond to you, even though that's his first name. Okay? Yeah, that's his real first name. Shh. We're not asking questions. Okay? That's all right. Beto O'Rourke's real first name is Francis. Beto O'Rourke? Like the representative from El Paso who ran against Ted Cruz in the Senate race a few years ago, his real first name is Francis. Nothing, but it doesn't have the same ethnic ring as Beto. Right? Of course, then again, Raphael has a much more ethnic ring than Ted. Okay? The other option, if you're not going to go directly through the government, you can use what we call outsider strategies, which is essentially the idea of going through the electoral route, like trying to go through the public, get the people to elect individuals that will then be responsive for what you want, right? Or just taking people out of your interest group and sort of trying to put them into the political process, right? You can look at that on your own. Lobbying. Again, this is a term that I promise you, out of the few things that will show up on your test tomorrow for interest groups, lobbying will be one of them, right? Lobbying is the idea of asking government to be responsive to something, okay? So you will go to a legislature and you will be like, hey, Ted, I would like for you to vote in favor of Senate Bill yada, 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 right? You're explaining to him what it is you seek for him to do and why you seek for him to do that. Now, the reality is, or the way that it used to be, lobbying is relatively nefarious. It can be mundane, right? Meaning it can be very like passively nice and exactly what it should be. Okay? But it also can look sort of bad, right? The optics can be a little bad, right? Because obviously you realize that Ted Cruz should, I don't know that he is, but he should be working all day, yes? Yeah. He should be in committee meetings and he should be on the floor of the Senate arguing legislation and doing things like that. So if I want to meet with him to advocate for some legislation, when am I going to have time to do that? Which would be in the evening, right? After work, right? Well, he's got to have dinner, yes? And you think he would be more receptive to meeting with me if I sat down and bought him dinner? Probably, right? So it actually used to be that you would like take a congressman to dinner and you would buy them like the Kobe beef filet mignon, right? And like lobster and a $300 shot of scotch and God only knows what else. You're talking like thousands, a couple $1,000 just for the two of you to eat a meal, right? Now, if please don't answer this out loud because hopefully we have progressed past this society, right? But if we think back to the way things were in the 80s and 90s, right? If somebody took somebody else out to dinner and dropped a couple $1,000 on them, did they have expectations about what would happen after dinner? Yeah. 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 Right? So, at that point, it almost looks like the lobbyist is bribing Ted Cruz to vote a certain way, yes? Right? Because obviously, if he's going to drop a couple $1,000, like, he has expectations. You better vote the way I want you to vote. And now, I want you to understand, it's not, first of all, there's disagreement amongst political scientists as to whether that's actually bribery. I am of the camp, right? So I wouldn't test you on this because this is just opinion. I am of the camp that it is not bribery. I know it looks like bribery, right? But here's the thing. If I am a lobbyist for the NRA, right, I am not taking Beto O'Rourke out to dinner to try to explain to him why he should vote in favor of a piece of legislation I want him to vote in favor of. I already know that dude's voting against me. So I'm not going to waste my time and my energy and my money. Instead, I'm going to go to Ted Cruz and be like, hey, here's what I want you to do. Because Ted Cruz would be open to it because Ted Cruz supports gun ownership and gun rights as well. He is a pro-Second Amendment guy, which is what the NRA, if you don't know what the NRA is, that's the National Rifle Association, right? Okay. So the reality is because congressmen have voting records, right, we know how they vote on all sorts of different issues. Because of that, lobbyists are really only talking to people that are already receptive to their ideas or desires. Okay? In which case, it's not nearly as like buying a vote as what it would seem like in that other scenario. Yes, ma'am?
What interest group are you in?
I'm not in any interest groups. No, I don't have the money. I don't have disposable income. I got 3 children and a wife at home.
Who was the Like, all the people that you're talking about, who did you
That's a really, that's a long conversation. As a general rule, I vote for losers.
So who?
Really?
Yes.
Which one's the loser? Which one's your top loser?
It depends on the individual year.
Okay,
Like-
okay, we're talking about
Like, okay, so look.
yeah, last year.
So listen. So like, if you're talking about like 2020, right? Who did I vote for president of the United States in 2020? I voted for somebody that did not win, right? Who did I vote for in 2016? I voted for somebody that did not win, right? Like that's I vote for people that don't win.
You should have voted for.
Wait, didn't Trump win?
No.
Trump won in 2016. Biden won in 2020. That should tell you right there that I did not vote for either one of them.
You should vote.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right. That's a very long, complex conversation, and I'll be honest with you. As a general rule, I don't tell people. Actually, not as a general rule, as a hard rule, I don't tell people who I voted for because the reality is it's not going to change your opinion of the individual candidates, but it might change your opinion of me. Okay? The only election that I will ever tell anybody who I voted for is the presidential election of 2016 because I voted for myself. Yeah, I got like 7 votes, I think. I mean, assuming people were honest with me when they were like, yeah, I voted for you too. I was 35. I turned 35 in 2016, so I was eligible to be president of the United States. And good God, all 4 of those candidates were atrociously bad. Like, even the third-party candidates in 2016 were god-awful. So, honestly, I figured I was the most qualified, so I voted for myself.
Okay, so I have one more question. It has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
Okay, if you were I'll just be curious. If you were like the president of the United States,
I'd be shocked. Yes. I would. I would piss everybody off. Everybody would hate me. That's not true. 4% of the population would love me. 90% of the population would hate me, and 6% of the population would have no idea what's going on. Right? But I have found in my life I'm a very polarizing person. You either love me or you hate me.
so
Right.
you think you would drastically change, like?
No, what I'm saying is if I was actually like elected president of the United States and I had that podium, right, meaning like that level of voice and like I would tell people how it is. Like, I'm sorry, but like I would sit there and I would look at people and be like, you're an idiot. And I would just tell them to their face. Like, I have very little filter. You have no idea how hard it is for me as an educator to filter sometimes. Right? I think I told you all the other day, I get like drool a fair amount. All right. Okay, let's get through this so I can stop recording and documenting this. Because I give y'all a hard time all the time for documenting all of your stupidity, and now I'm doing it. So, right? So here we go. Maybe I'll just have to make this video private. That might be what we have to do. Don't show this to your parents, please. Okay. So, lobbying Congress, again, this is the big takeaway from today, right? So lobbying is a verb, that's the behavior. Lobbyists are the noun, those are the people engaged in the lobbying. I'm gonna be honest with you, if you have very low morals, right, and you wanna be filthy rich, go be a lobbyist, right? Like, you can advocate for things in front of the government. There's actually like firms that are paid lobbyists that are actually not part of like an actual interest group. The interest group just hires them, and then they go around advocating for things whether they believe in them or not. Which is part of the reason why you should have like low like moral value, because you're going to have to do things that you might morally disagree with, because that's who's paying you. But you can make a lot of money as a lobbyist. A lot of money. Easy 6 figures. Right? Like, I'm saying 6 figures in like massive expense accounts. Right? Because again, the way that it used to work, I mean, there's actually a video on D2L, it's like a 20-minute long video, I advise you watch it tonight. It's about a guy named Jack Abramoff, who was one of the most notorious lobbyists in the United States in like the 1980s and 90s. That dude had 2 people on his staff whose sole job it was to buy tickets. That's it, that's all they did. They just bought tickets to like, well, they were the Redskins back then, they're the Commanders now. But like the Redskins, the Washington Capitals, back then they would have been called the Washington Bullets, I think, or maybe they were already the Wizards, I don't know. Right, but that's all they did. All they did was just bought tickets to like concerts and sporting events and all sorts of things like that, so that they could then turn around and give those tickets to congressmen. Right? No, I'm saying like Abramoff is getting 6 figures. His staff, that guy's probably making $75,000, $80,000 a year. Okay, you realize they just offered you $80,000 a year to do nothing but like go on Ticketmaster or whatever and buy like still a ridiculously easy job. What? Okay, this is actually, and this is later in the PowerPoint, but since Rodney is asking, I'm going to go ahead and cover this now. This is actually where lobbying gets really dicey, right? Because a lot of the times, the people that are lobbyists, we actually have what's called the revolving door. Y'all know what a revolving door is? You ever been to like a super fancy hotel?
Oh, yeah, like go to.
Right, yeah, like it has the door that just spins round and round and round.
Yeah.
And the revolving door in politics is the idea of people going from the public sector, which is government, to the private sector, and then right back in, and just constantly moving back and forth. And so what they do is they get paid just boatloads of money in the private sector to utilize the connections that they have in the public sector to get things done, right? So actually there are people that serve in Congress, elected representatives, who then get out of Congress and become lobbyists. Well, they know everybody. They have everybody's number on speed dial. Right, which gives them an unfair influence and then allows them to charge more for their lobbying. Okay, which again is one of the negative aspects of this. I do want you to understand lobbying does not just occur to Congress. That's how we typically talk about it most, right? But you do have industries that will lobby the president as well, right? They will lobby the executive branch, not just the president, right? But you have interest groups and people that will be lobbying the Department of Justice or the State Department or whomever. Okay? They will engage in a lot of different types. Now this is the second like really super important thing. Again, this I promise you will show up on your test tomorrow. you need to know what an iron triangle is. Okay? So if you see right here, right, this little triangle is a very good representation. You have Congress, you have the bureaucracy, and you have the interest groups. We will actually cover iron triangles every time we go through one of the three of these. Interest groups are just first. Okay? So that's one corner of that triangle. Interest groups provide money to Congress through electoral support. Right? Interest groups have PACs. PACs give significant sums of money to Congress. Okay? In fact, PACs, you'll learn this as we move forward, PACs are really for congressmen, super PACs are really for presidents. Okay? Congress will then turn around and they will provide legislation or oversight that is friendly to the interest group. Right? The interest group also lobbies the bureaucracy. Right? So they are trying to get the bureaucracy to implement the law passed by Congress in the manner in which they want it to be passed. Okay? And the bureaucracy will provide sort of benefits and favors to the interest group through a variety of factors, again, such as like special favors or special behaviors or decreasing regulations or the way they're actually implementing laws. Okay? So that's an iron triangle. A subset of an iron triangle. So I want you to understand, like again, if we just talk about it, right, we have Congress, we have the bureaucracy, and then we have interest groups, right? So this is our iron triangle right here. Inside of this triangle is something called an issue network, right? So in an issue network, we would have, and the example I'm going to use because it's always the easiest for me, right? We have Boeing. Anybody know what Boeing is? Boeing makes airplanes. Okay? Boeing makes like military grade aircraft. Okay? So Boeing has their own interest group, right? When they go to Congress, they ain't going to all 435 members of the House of Representatives. They are going to the Armed Services Committee. Right? So this is a committee. Okay? And then instead of dealing with all of the bureaucracy, because let's be honest, the Department of the Interior might not matter. Right? The Small Business Administration definitely doesn't matter. What part of the bureaucracy do they really care about?
FAA.
The Department of Defense. Right? I get why you say FFA, but because it's military grade. If it was just American Airlines, then yeah, it's probably the FFA. But because they're trying to sell military weapons,
Two
they-
A's, no.
what?
One F, two A's.
What did I say? FFA?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Future Farmers of America. Definitely not right. My bad.
Nope.
Little dyslexia popping up there.
So for this class for interest groups, we should focus on lobbying the iron triangle? Like when we're studying?
Yes.
And then, is it what the media or
Most media, then parties, then interest groups, in that order. In terms of like, so you're looking like, I don't know, 45, 35, 20. Right? Maybe somewhere around there. 50, 30, 20, I don't know. I haven't done the math. But interest groups will be the smallest part of it. Okay? The third thing that I care about with interest groups, right? Another thing that interest groups can utilize is litigation. And so the best example I can give you of this, actually what I wrote in the PowerPoint was the ACLU, but an even better example that I can give you is the NAACP. We know what the NAACP is? Right? The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Yes? Okay, that organization began in 1920-something, probably. I don't know the exact year. Okay? The NAACP is an organization, it is an interest group by definition, right? Obviously their interest group is like civil rights, or their interest, sorry. Their interest would be civil rights, yes? Okay? The NAACP is actually the organization that helped bring the Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education to the Supreme Court, right? That is utilizing litigation. This is an insider strategy. The NAACP is going to use the court system to sue in order to get their interest achieved, right? And obviously, I like the NAACP here as the example because they were successful, right? The Brown versus Board of Education was successful for the NAACP, right? Obviously, it didn't happen overnight, but they did get the ruling they wanted, right, and we began to desegregate schools in the United States, right? That is the concept of litigation by interest groups, okay? Now, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail when we get to the Supreme Court, okay? Because obviously that's where it's coming from. I already told you that PACs, that interest groups have PACs, right? And that's where that information is coming from. Technically, they can have super PACs. Super PACs raise unlimited sums of money. But for the most part, your interest groups are creating PACs and then providing money to Congress because that's who they're most frequently dealing with. Mobilization, this is the outsider strategy concept, right? So grassroots mobilization would just be the idea of getting people together to create protests and things of that nature, right? So again, on the left, that's a old historical example, right? That's Dr. King, and I forget exactly which march that is. It might be Selma. It's certainly not the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, or whatever it was called. Okay. The one on the right is sort of what we call the Tea Party Revolution, which began sometime around 2004 or 5, somewhere in that range. That was sort of a Republican, mild Republican revolution, right? The one on the left is sometimes referred to as Occupy Wall Street. The one on the right would be part of Black Lives Matter movements, right? But all of those are just the idea of going public. So instead of utilizing the legal system or the governmental agencies in order to try to get things done, you're trying to generate enough support amongst the people to force government to be responsive because the people are pushing it, right? How influential are interest groups? This depends on a variety of issues, right? How good is their leadership? How strong is their membership? How involved is their membership, right? Like if you go back to the very first slide of this PowerPoint, it was the AARP. That's the Association of American Retired People. American Association or Association of American, I don't know which A comes first, right? But it's basically old folks, okay? A whole bunch of people join the AARP, and they join the AARP because if you have an AARP card, you get like membership discounts for all sorts of things, right? Sometimes it can be financially advantageous to join the AARP, right? How invested are their actual members? Not that invested, right? Which means they're going to be less effective in trying to obtain what it is that they want, right? So some of that just depends upon the size of the group, but not just the size, because obviously a small group that is highly motivated and highly invested is better than a large group that's just sort of grazing and apathetic and not really involved. All right. Money. Obviously, the better they can raise money, that goes a long way as well. Last thing we have, and I do think this is like the last or second to last thing, we have tried to regulate lobbying, again, to stop the massive sums of money that are coming in. In fact, lobbyists now have to declare if they are lobbyists in Washington, D.C. There's little ways around that, but if that's their primary job, they got to tell people that's what they're doing. Excellent. We finished. Wonderful. Have a great day.
Yay!
Look at that, and I did it with actually time to spare.